My name is Kwame. This is going to be my submission for my video assignment. Unfortunately, I don't have all the necessary equipment to make this a smooth video. My ring light broke, pretty much. So I'm going to be shooting this from my phone and I'm going to be using the TV to project my presentation. I'll be flipping the camera back and forth to make this an easy transition. Okay? The topic we're going to be talking about is exploitation and civilization in the Americas. A presentation of how societies came to be, the nature of these societies, how they treated their slaves, and how the societies progressed. What we're dealing with today. Now, believe it or not, civilization as we know it began with food. Everything from the way people came to be, how they formed groups, how they made families, how they moved from one place to another. It was all because of food. Yes, food. I'm using corn as an example because that's pretty much the basis on what we're going to be focusing on today. But you get the picture. Now, giving a little bit of a backstory, how it all began. So, when we look over here, this is where humanity basically originated from. Don't fight me on it. That's pretty much what the historians are saying. And we migrated from that side over to Europe. Some people migrated over to Southeast Asia. So to Europe, Southeast Asia. Some people took the long route. They went all the way down to the Americas and South America, as you can see over here. Good. The reason why it's important to know how it all began is because we need to establish that the movement of people from one place to another was all because of food. When people used to live over here, when civilization was at its very beginning, when people used to live over here, food basically ran out. The deer and the other animals they were hunting were basically gone. The lands were no longer fertile enough to support the food they had, so they needed to find other sources of food. Some people moved over into this point, and here they were able to find food and sustenance. Others moved into the Asian parts of the world, and here they were able to find different kinds of plants, more specifically rice, barley, wheat, so on and so forth, and this made life livable. And for the others who were able to migrate all the way into the Americas following the yellow line, they were able to discover the plant called corn. Now, corn is very important to the American societies because it is what allowed them to progress to the point that they did. Moving on to the next slide. From this slide, you're going to realize that every single different geographical location had foods that were available to them, which made it easy for life to progress. If you look specifically at Mesoamerica, that is the South Americas, the North Americas, they were cultivating maize and squash. In the Central Andes, we're looking at llamas, potatoes, and guinea pigs. That is, these were animals, these were fruits and vegetables, so on and so forth. When you come over to the African side, you can find out that over here in the Sahel area, they were looking at millet and sorghum. The people who are living in Southeast Asia, close to Egypt, in this area where there's the Fertile Crescent, you see that they got access to barley, cattle, goats, pigs, sheep, and wheat. And those who moved far off into Asia were able to discover rice and millet. Now that we have gained an understanding of how it all began, we're going to focus on the protein, the main reason why we're here. We're going to be focusing on the Americas. Okay, so I've already given us the reasons why people move from one place to another, and it was basically because of food. Now we are going to create a platform from which we'll be able to better understand how civilizations grew because of food. Before we had all of this bustling, sprightly world that we have today with buildings and cars, technology, the internet, so on and so forth, this is what America was. America was a land of green vegetation, different sites, mountains, so on and so forth. A whole lot of buffaloes, that's for sure. And the people who were inhabiting the lands at that time were the Indians, the Native Americans. There were different tribes and different factions of them. The easiest thing to forget is that before Europeans colonized the American continent, was that people actually used to live here. So you might be wondering, where are all these people today? As it stands now, a lot of them are still here, but a lot of them passed away because of colonization. Some of them passed away due to diseases. Some of them were hunted down and killed. It was a very sad event. All right, so now that we have understood this point, I'm going to try to help you understand how civilization came across because of food. The easiest way to explain to make this very simple is to use a certain video game that exists. It's called Age of Empires. I don't know if many of y'all are familiar with it, but Age of Empires is basically a game where you build your civilization by using a group of villagers to go and find food, cattle, berries. You chop down wood, you mine gold, you mine stone so that you can use it to build your village, to build up your society or your group of people. You progress from age to age and you basically become a champion. That's pretty much how civilization in the olden days went. So, taking corn, for example, the people who moved all the way into the Americas, they discovered corn. Yes! Now they are not going to die of hunger. As they continue to grow the corn, as they continue to get more and more of the corn, they realized, hey, we need to be able to save some of this. In being able to save some of it, they were creating surplus. Surplus was the key to fast forwarding civilization. Because if a group of people do not have surplus, they cannot grow. If there isn't more food than there are mouths to feed, the group will always be hungry. Now, with this surplus came ease of life. So now they are saving up more of the food because there's abundance of food. Because of that, they realize that, hey, maybe we can trade some of this food with other neighboring groups. So they continue to trade this food with other neighboring groups. And in trading, now there's division of labor. Now, a group of people who are going to be the ones who are going to collect the food and go on to trade it. Other people are going to be the ones to collect the food, rear it in the farms. Other people are going to be the ones to make the homes. Now, through this division of labor, society continues to gradually and slowly develop. So, once upon a time, they were eating hand to mouth. Now, they are eating, they've gathered surplus, and now they are trading the surpluses. Did you get me? All right, cool. So now they are trading surpluses. And soon they'll be trading more than just food. They'll be trading ornaments, they'll be trading pots, they'll be trading pans, they'll be trading different things made by artisans from different groups. They'll be trading feathers for beautifications. They'll be learning how other groups are building their huts, how they're building their dams, how they're building their farms. And this information is going to circulate from society to society, and every civilization is going to grow using that. You have people move from building huts one type of way to suddenly the society is growing. Now everybody's building their huts that type of way because they've realized that it works. You have a group of people learn that, okay, now we can dress this way. It's nice. It feels more comfy in this current working environment. And we can gather feathers from a different clan, from a different area to beautify our look. And it goes on like that. So now we know how civilizations grow. Now we're going to move on to the point. For the purpose of this assignment, we're going to try to answer some of these questions. Or should I say, all of them? Yeah, pretty much all of them. Let me zoom in. So you can always pause it and look at the questions if you want to. What are the three main river valley civilizations of the Americas that existed during the period of the river valley civilizations of Afro-Eurasia? Yada, yada, yada. I'm going to go from question to question, but I'm going to be giving a whole lot of backstory and explanation as to how things are going or how things were in those times. So bear with me if you feel like I'm rambling on and on, okay? All right, cool. So to answer question one, The major river valley civilizations we can easily point to would be those living in the Andes area of the South America, the indigenous people who live close to the river basins of the Amazon, and I don't know how I'm gonna pronounce this. The Teotihuacans and the Mayans who were later replaced by the Toltecs in the Tehuacan Valley. Oh God, I'm gonna become a meme. So the Andes were on this side. They were living basically in the coastal areas because in order to grow food, you need access to water. And the beautiful thing is, these guys, including the people who were living in the Amazon areas and the people who were living in the Tehuacan valleys, they were able to figure out that hey, in order for us to have food all year round, we need to be able to have water all year round. It's basic math. If you can't water the plants are not going to grow. And if you're going to depend on just the seasons, when winter comes, you are going to be screwed. Well, thankfully, they're not in the region where they're going to be experiencing winter or any such thing. But if they can provide all year round water for their crops, they would be golden. So most of them through engineering were able to figure out that hey, maybe we can redirect some of these rivers that are around us so that they can use them to water the plants that we basically live on. So when you look at the map, you realize that the river systems run rampant all across South America. And even in the Americas in the Tehuacan Valley, there are rivers like the Rio Grande moving all the way into the coast over on this side. So yeah, that's pretty much how they were able to ensure that they had food all year round. Okay, so for question number 2, do you guys remember I said that corn is so important to the Americas? Thing, there were different kinds of it. Different kinds of it. All different shapes and colors. And in Americas, the people who lived in those areas, they cultivated it the most, which is different from the people who lived in Southeast Asia and what they had access to. They had a lot of rice and millets and they were fine with that. But you see, the beauty of corn is you actually have to tend to it. It's not one of those fruits that or vegetables that you can just walk up to and be like, oh, hey, it's here, I'm picking it. If you don't actively tend to corn, it will die. And so the people developed ways and means of rearing corn. They realized that they needed to tend to it carefully. And in tending to it carefully, the people became more and more agrarian in nature. They honed their agricultural skills, and that allowed them to produce more and more surplus. They figured out that if you plant too many seeds together at one time, when the corn cobs grow, they're going to grow small. So you can put in maybe 3 or 4 so that when the entire corn plant sprouts out, you're going to have 4 corn cobs and they're all going to be big and juicy and ready for eating. If we are comparing corn as an agricultural product to the Asian grains like cereal, barley, and rice, you could say that corn was a little bit high maintenance. Not as high maintenance as rice, but high maintenance, if you know what I mean. From my previous explanation of how much you need to tend to corn, you'll come to realize that they didn't just sprout anywhere. And once you started cultivating it, if you didn't pay attention to it, pests could come through and destroy your entire crop. Or if you didn't do things properly, your crop will not produce the yield that you were expecting. And so corn was very important. Compared to other agricultural products like rice, I would put them on the same scale of importance for the people who were eating it because it basically became the main delicacy. It was corn and then everything else. In Asia, it was more so rice and then everything else. That was the backbone of the society, pretty much. Okay, so the third question we're going to be looking at will be the health and sanitary conditions of the indigenous people prior to European colonization. Now, many people are that when they came through, there were a whole bunch of savages living in the lands of the Americas, but that is so far from the truth from what I've read. So far from the truth. Would you believe me if I told you that they had rituals, bathing rituals in place? You know how you walk into the L train on New York and you walk by someone and you're like, this person is not taking a bath in a week? The Indians were bathing before the Europeans were. Would you believe that? They sailed across ships all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, and the Indians had discovered bathing before they had. The Indians would most likely find themselves commit doing bathing rituals in rivers and so on and so forth. And whenever they were sick, they would use all of these herbs and leaves in their environment to heal themselves. The kind of food that they were eating contained a whole lot of fiber. Hello, corn. And so they were not having constipation issues. It's pretty much evidence that the Indians and the indigenous people were able to build paradise on earth. They may not have had all the amenities and necessities that we have today, but they went a long way to ensure that the bare necessities were catered for. They had abundant food. They had figured out how to have food all year round. They had grown their societies. They had water all year round. They were safe. What else could they possibly ask for? Okay, so the fourth question we're going to be looking at is that what proof do we have of the influence of indigenous people in Mesoamerica on the peoples of what is now called United States of Canada or the North? Hello, corn, movements, trade. There's so much. Here, let me show you. All right, right now on the screen, we have a small representation of what is now Delaware, a few pieces of New York and New Jersey, and pretty much Pennsylvania, if you can recognize it, all over on this side. I don't want to be drawing on the screen because I might be messing it up. But for starters, the people who are in South America would also travel. Now, they would move from one geographical location to another if they wanted to have more access to, let's say, buffalo, which was migrating in a different spot. Or they might migrate because they want a change of pace, or they're moving away from a warring faction who is out to get them. They could be moving up and down all across the land because of trade. And in doing that, they would meet new people, they would share some of their culture, they would share their way of life and the way of doing things with one another. And these shared values, these shared artifacts, these shared ethnicities would go on to move all across the land. I mean, think about it. We have the language of Spanish. People from Peru would speak Spanish. People from Mexico would speak Spanish. People from South America in Honduras would speak Spanish. People from the Dominican Republic would speak Spanish. But every single one of them will tell you that the other person's Spanish the same as my Spanish. To this day, I don't understand how, but it pretty much brings home the fact that even though it's the same language, there are different pieces and intricacies which are symbolic to every specific group of people. So it's one language shared across board, but everybody has a curated personal version of theirs, if you get where I'm going with this, which means that it's not just language that is being shared. Those curated personal differences prove that at some point in time, this language was learned across board. Do you get me? And not just Spanish in general. For the indigenous people, whatever other languages that they spoke, there were definitely intersectionalities. There were points where there were connections between one group of people or another, either through marriage, through language, through food, through culture, so many things. And so you can definitely make a point that all of these different avenues are ways through which their culture, their food, their devices, their clothing could travel all the way up. Definitely makes sense. Now, looking at question five basically asks us to look at some of the achievements of the Mayan and the Olmec civilizations. And in order to do that, I'm going to be comparing them a little bit to previous civilizations which existed in other parts of the world, like the Egyptian civilizations. So, for the Egyptian civilizations, oh god, I'm gonna turn into a meme. Civilizations. You know what? Let's continue. I don't care. For the Egyptian civilizations, they were building around the Nile. A vast majority of their projects were pulled off using slaves. The pyramids were built by slaves. The food was cultivated by slaves. But their centralized system of governance, their understanding and their treatment of their slaves was way different from the way other groups of people treated their slaves on the other side of the ocean, if you get what I mean. I'm not going to go into it. So, in those societies, they were growing their food by the river. So, they pretty much had food all year round. Now, in other parts of Mesoamerica, the South Americas, those who had access to rivers would build their communities, would build their farms, their plantations around these rivers so that they could have access to water all year round. In some places, there are natural disasters. That's floodings. So you build your farm around a river, and every other day it floods. You're screwed. So most of these indigenous people, through engineering, figured out ways through which they could cut across the land, redirect some of the rivers, create dams so that they could allow the water to be around all year round, at the same time preventing their crops from being overrun. Isn't it amazing? We think that all these dams and engineering prowesses we have in our time today came in our time, but we actually got them from people who, looking back, everybody would think they don't have any technology. They're probably savages, but that is so far from the case. I mean, looking at the Mayan and the Olmec civilization, they had consensus systems of governments. Believe it or not, when the Europeans first landed and they were trying to figure out how they were going to control and colonize them, they tried the bribery. But it doesn't work because you can bribe one person, but that doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree with what he's saying. The consensus system of government is basically saying that we don't believe in the person in power, but we believe in what is right. Pretty much the justice system that we are built on today, that we know what is right and what is wrong, and just because someone in power is saying the wrong thing doesn't mean that he is right. So that level of governance existed, that level of understanding within society existed, and everybody respected it. So it made it very hard to go against them. The Mayans in particular had mathematical and astrological prowess. The calendars we use now, a whole lot of astrological things that we look to, the Mayan calendar. If you guys would remember, in 2012, they were saying that the Mayan calendar was coming to an end. And so many people thought the world was going to come to an end. I know, I remember that one too. But that's just beside the point. We have advanced civilizations with division of labor giving birth to different classes. We have the ruling classes, who would be the kings, the queens, the people in charge of everything. Usually this was created thanks to surplus. So the person who has the most surplus then gets to hire people to work on his farms because he can provide food for them to eat, so on and so forth. And over time, the people with the most surplus become the owners of production. And if they are the owners of production, then the division of labor means that they need to find people to work for them. Capitalism, slow and steady. We have the priests, we have the merchants, we have the artisans, and then we have the slaves who are doing all the work. We have roads and religious artifact constructions. If you take a look into history, you see all of these pyramids built by the Mayans. Every time we see them, we assume that they were built by aliens. Believe it or not, human beings built those. And the fact that they didn't have the cranes or the kind of technology we do today makes me wonder how many years it took them and the kind of vision that they had to be able to see all of these projects through. It was amazing. And engineering river manipulation for agricultural processes, which I've already talked about. Sixth question we're going to be looking at will be to explain the economic basis of the Aztecs. I've pretty much been doing that this entire time with regards to their engineering, how they were able to navigate rivers to make sure that these rivers provided constant water supply to their crops, how they were able to trade, how they were able to increase their food production, so on. This is pretty much the slide for it. And the access is made possible through dams, redirecting rivers, and pretty much slave labor. Now, another key thing that we need to tackle would be how it all fell apart, unfortunately. Because I don't want to make this a very, very lengthy video, I'm going to summarize it as much as I can. Number one, European influence and we all know how it goes. The ship lands on the coast, and everything goes south. I mean, everything. Not south in terms of moving down south, but south in terms of conditions deteriorating, people losing access to their native land, people being subjugated, colonized, and subsequently turned into slaves, or merciless massacring of indigenous people. I'm pretty sure we're aware of that part. It's difficult to talk about for me personally because of the amount of research I've done. It's it's sad. It's really sad, and it weighs heavy on my heart because it's the same MO across board. The ships land. You think you're meeting a new group of people. Suddenly you're their slaves. And if you are not subjugated, you're all gonna get killed off. Your possessions are taken away from you. Your land is taken away from you. You are forced to learn their way of life. And you're constantly told that your way of life is not a way of life. It's not right. It's backward. Yet the people who are the ones killing and massacring your entire family, their way of life is right. Well, enough with that part. Second one we can talk about votes. This is where you can talk about people being turned against their own brothers and sisters. So with regard to the slave revolts in the Mayan Empire in particular, when the Inquisition came through, when the Spanish were going through South America trying to colonize them, what they did was they were able to incite some of the slaves. They were like, look at how these people are treating you. And it's not just the slaves that were revolting. It's more so the people who did not want to be under the rule of the current people in power. That is, amongst the indigenous people. And so they would revolt, they would break down their society, and they would tear away from them. Now that the entire society or civilization has fallen apart, the Spanish roll in, they pick up the pieces, they loot them and ransack them for all their gold, their ornaments, their women and children. It's sad. It's really sad. And we can look at number 4, which is the systematic removal of natives from their lands through force and fear. And for this, look at places like Canada, where there are certain native groups of people who eventually went into treaties with the government that this was going to be their land and that treaty was going to be respected. But later on, those treaties were not being honored, and the same land that was promised to them was suddenly being used to build golf courses. And the people would mount, what's it called? They would mount, why is the word escaping me in this video? They would make protests, yes. They would make protests, they would block the roads, but as more and more time passed and their demands were not being met, those protests would turn violent, and the government would in turn set the military upon them. With live rounds, people. You should look it up on YouTube. It's sad. But that's pretty much gonna bring an end to this discussion that I'm trying to have. We see how they came about to be. We saw how they progressed. We saw how they were able to flourish. And now we've seen how it all fell apart. I would like to make note of the fact that the image used belongs to their respective owners and they are used in this presentation now for educational purposes. All rights belong to whoever these images belong. I'm not trying to claim anything. Thank you guys for your time.